While missiles are still flying, a new phase of this war is being planned in the shadows, one in which U.S. and Israeli commandos could land inside Iran itself. On the table right now are two of the most dangerous ideas of this conflict: seizing Iran's main oil lifeline and sending special forces to grab its stockpile of enriched uranium. If either mission goes wrong, we're not just talking about higher oil prices, we're talking about captured American troops, a furious Iran, and a war that could spiral far beyond the Middle East. We may now be entering the most dangerous phase of the Iran-US-Israel conflict, a phase where a single raid could decide who wins, who loses, and how far this war spreads. On President Donald Trump's desk, according to multiple media reports, are two high-risk scenarios: a commando assault on Iran's main oil export hub, and a covert mission to seize its most sensitive nuclear material. The first target is Karg Island, a small patch of land in the Persian Gulf, but a giant in strategic importance. Karg serves as the terminal for nearly all of Iran's crude exports, with a loading capacity of about 7 million barrels per day and jetties that handle more than 90% of the country's oil shipments. U.S. officials, cited by Axios and other outlets, have discussed what it would mean to seize this island or render it inoperable, effectively choking off Iran's economic lifeline in a single blow. The concept is simple but explosive: deploy American and possibly Israeli special forces to land on Karg, secure key terminals and storage tanks, and either hold the island or disable its infrastructure. Military analysts compare it to an Abbottabad-style operation, the 2011 raid that killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, but against a far better defended target, surrounded by Iranian naval, missile, and drone assets. If successful, such a move could slash Iran's export capacity overnight. If it fails, it could leave dozens of commandos killed or captured, with Tehran eager to parade them before the world. The second scenario may be even more sensitive. Axios and other sources report that U.S. and Israeli officials have considered sending special forces into Iran to seize or neutralize roughly 450 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% material that could be further processed into weapons-grade fuel within weeks. Plans under discussion include either physically removing the stockpile from Iran or flying in nuclear experts to dilute it on site, potentially under International Atomic Energy Agency supervision if a diplomatic twist becomes possible. Any attempt to do this without Iran's consent would almost certainly be treated in Tehran as an act of war on par with bombing a nuclear facility. For Iran, both plans are red lines. Karg Island is not just a port. It is a symbol of Iran's ability to survive sanctions and keep its economy afloat by exporting oil, even under pressure. Its nuclear program, meanwhile, is framed by Iranian leaders as a matter of sovereignty and deterrence after years of assassinations and sabotage operations that Tehran blames on Israel and the U.S. If foreign troops land on Iranian soil to steal or destroy uranium stocks, it would confirm every warning hardliners have made about Western intentions. Iran has already started preparing the battlefield. Tehran says it has struck and disabled several advanced U.S. radar and missile defense systems across the region, including a high-value THAAD radar in Jordan that analysts estimate was worth around $300 million. Satellite imagery indicates damage at bases in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the way that house-key interceptors used to track and shoot down incoming missiles. If these eyes and ears are blinded, any special forces mission becomes much riskier, and so does the defense of U.S. troops and allies in the Gulf. At the same time, Iran has intensified its missile campaign. Reports and regional footage suggest salvos of ballistic missiles, including types similar to Khyber Shikhan, Imad, and Qatar, have been launched at U.S. and Israeli targets, aiming to overwhelm missile defenses already strained by days of attacks. American media outlets now openly discuss the role of Russia and China in helping Iran refine its targeting and electronic warfare, arguing that such precision would be difficult without support from major powers. Washington, meanwhile, has acknowledged losing significant hardware in the opening days of the war, with estimates of destroyed or damaged defense assets running into the billions of dollars. For Gulf states, the cost is already enormous. Regional reports suggest that the economic damage to Gulf economies from disrupted shipping, infrastructure hits, and lost investment could approach $300 billion if the conflict drags on for just a few more days at current intensity. Oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Way, and Qatar is struggling to move freely as the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively choked, storage tanks fill up, and some cargoes are delayed or rerouted under different flags to hide their origin. Investors, seeing the risk, are pulling back capital that would normally flow into Middle Eastern projects and, in some cases, into the U.S. itself. This is why some Gulf governments are now asking for outside help. Australia has reportedly been approached for assistance with advanced air and missile defense technology to help intercept Iranian drones and missiles that U.S. systems have struggled to stop consistently. The message is clear: if American protection can no longer guarantee safety, regional states will look elsewhere or demand more robust guarantees, more hardware, and more control over how their territory is used in this war. At the same time, information warfare is intensifying. Iran accuses the U.S. and Israel of staging or conducting certain attacks themselves and then blaming Gulf states in an effort to drag Arab governments into direct confrontation with Tehran. One recent example came after a strike on an Iranian desalination plant. Israeli media suggested the attack came from the way, but Emirati officials quickly denied any involvement. Tehran insists that some strikes attributed to Iranian proxies are, in fact, covert operations by Israel or the U.S. aimed at deepening mistrust between Iran and its neighbors. Behind closed doors, not everyone is buying the idea of an endless war. Former Qatari Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim has publicly argued that one of the main goals of this conflict is to keep Arab states and Iran locked in mutual destruction while Western powers sell weapons and maintain leverage over Gulf security. He and other regional voices warn that as long as Washington remains the main security guarantor, local states will be dragged into wars that primarily serve others' interests. Their solution: gradually free themselves from absolute dependence on the U.S. and diversify security partnerships, including closer ties with Russia and China. For Washington, this is a serious long-term risk. If Gulf monarchies conclude that American defense systems cannot reliably stop Iranian missiles and that U.S. strategy is fueling rather than containing conflict, they may seek new arrangements, from buying more Russian and Chinese weapons to inviting those powers into regional security talks that would weaken one of the pillars of U.S. influence in the Middle East and shift the balance of global power in ways that go far beyond this war. And yet, for now, the U.S. and Israel show little sign of stepping back. Trump and his advisors continue to talk about restoring deterrence and preventing Iran from ever reaching a nuclear weapons capability, even as they explore options that could trigger a much larger confrontation. Iranian leaders, on the other hand, say they will not rest until they have avenged assassinated commanders and proven that U.S. and Israeli forces cannot operate in the region without paying a heavy price. Both sides frame their actions as defensive. Both are pushing the other closer to the edge. For ordinary people in Tehran, Tel Aviv, Doha, Dubai, and beyond, the consequences are already here. Families live with the sound of sirens and the fear that the next strike could hit their neighborhood, their workplace, or their power station. Rising fuel and electricity prices, disrupted trade routes, and falling investment are quietly reshaping daily life, from the cost of groceries to the chances of finding a job. The longer this continues, the harder it will be to rebuild trust between neighbors and between citizens and the governments that claim to protect them. So what happens if these two high-risk plans move from the planning room to reality? A raid on Karg Island could remove millions of barrels of oil per day from the market and invite massive Iranian retaliation against Gulf infrastructure, shipping, and possibly Western cities via cyber attacks or proxy strikes. A special forces mission to seize enriched uranium could collapse what remains of the nuclear diplomacy framework and push Iran to formally break out of its previous commitments. In both cases, miscalculation is easy, and de-escalation would become far more difficult than it is today. Right now, world leaders face a choice. They can keep gambling on raids, strikes, and sanctions that might deliver short-term wins but carry enormous long-term risks, or they can push for a hard, uncomfortable diplomacy that includes regional powers, not just Washington and Tehran. The stakes are not only who controls one island or one stockpile of uranium, but whether a generation grows up in a region defined by permanent war or by a fragile, imperfect peace. If you want clear, in-depth coverage of the Karg Island plans, the nuclear raid scenario, and how this war could reshape global energy and security, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who still thinks this is just another Middle East story, and tell us in the comments where you live and how this crisis is already touching your life.